term that has become, I feel like, more of a buzzword in recent homeschool years. I don't really remember hearing it growing up, was the term of narration. A lot of times I have people ask me like, what is narration? Like, how does that work? What do you do with that? And so I just wanted to share a couple of tips and tricks for it. Hello, welcome to Mile High Homeschool. My name is Megan. If you're new here, I'm a second generation homeschooler, and I like to make videos to share encouragement and tips for you guys to hopefully make life a little bit easier. First off, what is narration? Narration is simply telling back what your child has just learned. So for example, if you were doing narration in history, you would read the portion of your history book that you guys were reading together. Usually it's more of like a living style book. And then you would ask very broad, open-ended questions for your child to answer. And depending on their age, you would ask like narrower or more broad questions. So for younger kids, you can give them more guided and directed questions. For example, a couple weeks ago, we were reading about Emperor Constantine. And so I had asked what happened to the Christians after Constantine became a Christian. And my daughter was able to talk about it, and she's like, oh, well, once Emperor Constantine became a Christian, it was safe for them to be Christians and they weren't persecuted anymore, and so they could actually have church and didn't have to be in the catacombs anymore. And so she was able to like play out more of it. One of the questions I think I asked was, with Emperor Constantine, what was his experience with becoming a Christian? And so once again, it's a little more narrow of a question because I'm looking for a specific thing that happened, but I didn't say what vision did he see, what dream did he have. So narration does have some questions, but it doesn't need to be super pointed ones. It's not like a discussion question kind of a thing of, tell me about this, or what is the mitochondria? You're not asking that, you're having it be a little bit more open, or like, tell me what happened with Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. Here's the two characters that we read about. Tell me the story of it, because it helps them learn if they have to, in their own mind, organize the details, sift through what they had heard you read, organize it, and then tell it back to you. A couple of tips I have for narration, especially if you're just getting started and you haven't done this before with your kids. Number one is to make sure that you're doing manageable sized pieces of reading. You don't necessarily want to sit and read a whole chapter that's like 30 pages long and then ask your first grader like, tell me about what we read. Typically in our history, a day's reading is about a page and a half. So it's like 3 paragraphs, maybe 4. It's not an overwhelming amount of information. And when we first started narration, and she kind of struggled with it at the very beginning because it was a new concept, I would read a paragraph and then ask her to talk to me about it. Read another paragraph, ask that. One thing you can do too, if you're doing narration with lots of kids, is maybe you read a shorter section, ask the younger kid to narrate it. Then you finish reading the longer section, ask the younger kid to narrate that second part of the section, and then ask the older one to narrate both together. And they have to include details that the younger one left out, you know. And so you can kind of scale it to match each child's ability, even if you're working in a group. Another tip that I see a lot of moms do with narration that I think is super smart is you write down the key words for that section on either a whiteboard or a little chalkboard or even just a note card for the kids to have, that they can, and you can talk about those keywords too, of, hey, in today's reading, make sure you listen for the keywords of Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, Egypt, and Pompeii. And don't give them context for it, just say, listen for these keywords. And then the kid's gonna be paying attention more to the reading and clue in when they hear those keywords of like, oh, we're talking about Julius Caesar. Oh, he's going to Egypt. He's looking for Pompeii, his nephew. Okay, and so they can like key on to those, and it's kind of like little hooks along the way for them to hang their hat on. So that way when they go back to narrate, they can see the list of keywords and be like, okay, how did those keywords fit into the whole story and structure? Take some time to organize it and then narrate it back to you. The last tip I have for narration is make sure that you're reading at the proper pace. I'm sure you've noticed in my videos that I tend to talk really fast. This is actually me making an effort to talk slower. I tend to talk even faster than this. And when I read, I also tend to read at a pretty quick pace, even if I'm reading aloud. However, that's not helpful for my daughter as she's trying to narrate. So I have to make the point to, when I am reading, I intentionally slow down and read with inflection and emotion, and I take a little bit longer than I think I might have to. So you'll feel kind of weird when you do that initially, but as you slow down your reading, because yes, you're reading it aloud, you understand what you're reading it that fast, it's fine, you can keep going, keep going, keep going. Your child is trying to catch up with everything that you're saying. And yes, listening comprehension is a higher level than reading comprehension for the majority of people. However, they still need it slowed down a little bit, especially if they're going to turn around and tell you that information and be able to sort it logically. So just slow the pace of your reading a little bit and be a little more intentional to read slower and with good inflection and pronunciation and emotion. And then when your child narrates, they pick up on more. And I will tell you, that was one of those simple changes that we made that made a huge difference in my daughter's narration level and ability. I remember the first while we were reading, I didn't realize I was reading too fast. I was frustrated because I felt like she wasn't able to understand what I was saying or categorize it or anything like that. And so I would get frustrated. I kept shortening the amount of reading that we were doing and it wasn't working. And then I realized I was simply just reading too fast. And when I slowed down, she could actually narrate longer passages at a time with less difficulty than she could previously. Also, just remember to be patient. Don't expect your kid to just have the answer on the tip of their tongue. So when you ask them a question, just be quiet and wait. Don't try to prompt. Don't try to give answers. Don't give hints, anything like that. Just wait and be patient and let them mull it over and think over the information. And my daughter, every now and then, she'll be like, Mom, I really can't remember. And so I don't offer to read it again because I want her to learn the habit of paying attention. So instead what I do is I might help narrow it down a little. If I had asked a really broad question, I might narrow it down a little. I might ask if she remembers a specific person and what happened to them in the story as opposed to a whole story all at once. Be really patient, and not just in that day's reading, but be patient as you build this habit up over time. It is a skill that can be developed. It is a skill that can be learned, but like any skill, it takes time. So don't expect to have it down in a week. It might take a while, especially if your kids have never done it before, especially if your kids are really young. Just be patient with yourself and with them. I hope this video was helpful for you guys and gave you some good tips with narration and how you can incorporate it in your homeschool. It's not that challenging. I would say maybe just start it with 1 or 2 subjects at most at a time. But I'd love to hear how you guys use narration in your homeschool or any tips that you have. Be sure and comment them below. It'll be really helpful for other people. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.